With the locking mechanisms and the containers all done, all that remains in this project is to build the top and the bottom. The top gets glued to the container, and then the whole thing drops down into the locking mechanism. The locking mechanism, this bottom ridge here, fits down inside and gets glued to a base unit. I've done a very simple sketch. This is just stacked ring construction. I'm not going to spend a lot of time showing every step of this. I'm going to build this and show you the final installation. But I've got a domed shape top, 4 layers. It'll have a floating disc in the top of this, and this will get glued onto my container. And then the base, just a little bit taller, 5 layers. And again, this bottom will fit into that base unit and be secured there. The bottom will also have a floating base in here. Here's a closer look if you really want to look at this. I've got my diameters, I've got my material width, and I've got my segment lengths. So I can go to work, make these rings and get them stacked together. The construction of the tops and bottoms is pretty routine. Matter of cutting segments, using the half ring technique, putting those together, sanding the half rings, rejoining those, sanding the outside smooth, splitting, and then stacking into the tops and bottom forms. The first step before turning the dome lid is to determine how deep this container top goes into the lid. So I've put it into my Cryptex here, I've turned my locking rings, and I'm investigating just how much play there is, how much will it move back and forth. It's less than 1/8 of an inch. So I've split the difference and marked the location, which will put those pins centered between the locking rings. I'm now putting tape on there on my pencil line. This tells me how deep into the underside of the dome lid to glue this container into place. Here's my lid, that's the top. This is the underside where the container will be glued. But first I'm going to turn a little tenon on this top surface so I can turn it around, securely mount it centered in my chuck. Now I can work on the underside of the lid. I want it nice and flat, and then I have to sneak up on a fit to put the top of my container into the underside of this dome lid. Just a matter of turn a little check and so forth. Sneak up on this fit. It's looking pretty good here, just needs to go a smidgen deeper. Once I've got that fitted up just right, I need to determine the overall diameter. Well, I want my dome lid to be slightly larger than the diameter of my locking rings. That turns out to be 4.4 inches. A little turning here on the corner, and now a little sanding on the bottom. I'll be ready to work on the top side of this dome. Before working on the top side of the dome, I've got one more thing to do to my container. The open bottom end needs some closure, so I've turned this little disc of walnut. It's only about 1/8 of an inch thick. It'll fit into this groove, a little bit of a sloppy fit, with glue at just the 2 end grain ends, kind of like a floating base into the bottom of this tube. Now for my dome top, I'm going to need a piece of solid wood. This happens to be maple burl. I'm mounting it there with double-sided tape and just turning it down to a nice clean 2-inch diameter. I'm just guessing that that's about what I'm going to need. So with this done, I'm going to go back to my lid. There's the underside that the container goes in. I can mount that using the chuck in expansion mode. Now you're looking at the top of the lid, the dome. And it's just a matter of shaping this into a pleasing shape, coming down to about that 2-inch diameter, and cutting a recess there, getting a sloppy fit for this piece of maple burl. Now I've determined the grain direction, which is not easy on the burl, and glued it in place on just the 2 end grain ends. Centered it in my opening, little weight there. Now after this is cured, back to the lathe and making a nice smooth top to this. Just a continuous curve. Of course, it's got that sloppy seam. That's where I'll open this up with a parting tool and shape this dark ring to fit in as a keeper. So it's a matter of turning and checking and so forth, getting this to fit that groove. Initially it's almost there. The final fit up is easier to do on the female portion of the fit up. So it's back on the lathe with the dome and trim a little bit here and there, checking as I go, and eventually getting this to seat in there very nicely. The glue job, I'm again marking the end grain of the burl where I can put glue, and the ring itself has minimal glue just on the ring, so when I push it in I do not get glue on the sides of the burl. And I've aligned the seams for a bricklay effect. Now the chuck is back on the lathe. From start to finish, it's important that the dome stays in the chuck so everything stays nice and concentric. A little turning there finishes things off. This little 1/4 inch hole here is going to accept a little piece of ebony. This will be my indication for where the locking rings need to line up in order to unlock the container. So a little sanding here. Now the entire thing gets sanded to 400 grit. On these seams, I'm placing these little grooves. That's a clever way to disguise any future wood movement that might occur. Here's my dome, ready for its container. Now, gluing the container to the dome is pretty straightforward, but it's very important, obviously, to line up those pegs as accurately as possible with this little dot of ebony. A little weight on here, and this can sit for a while. Okay, let's work on the base. I've taken my glue up and attached it with hot melt to a disc of MDF. I want to size the diameter of the top to match the dome lid, and I need to open up this inside to match the sleeve of my Cryptex box. Another one of those sneak up on a fit kind of things. A little sanding, and then removal of most of the hot melt glue, a little persuasion. I can now reverse mount this and work on the underside. I've protected the finished surface with tape. I've put my unit in the chuck in expansion mode. I'm just working on these curves, getting it nice and flat and smooth, and then creating a recessed area to accept a floating panel, a floating disc. This is a piece of holly which I've flattened, sanded, scored a few lines, and now a very deep parting cut will take this off. I want to layer, about an 1/8 to 3/16 of an inch thick. On a parting cut this deep, make sure you keep that curve wide open. Here's my keeper ring being shaped and sized to fit my base. A little sanding here on the inside. Part this off. It's still a little too big, or the opening's too small, so a little trim gets this to fit perfectly. The glue job, a little glue on the end grain ends of my floating disc, centered in the opening, minimal glue on the keeper ring, press it into place, bricklay position, a little weight, and this can sit for a while. To finish it off, pretty simple, just to clean up this bottom, a little sanding, and the base unit is done. Except I forgot my little ebony dot, had to go back and do that. Well, here are all my components, my 3 tops and 3 bottoms. They've had the first coat of sanding sealer, and then they'll have the def spray put on later. Here's the second coat of sanding sealer being buffed. Then I'll proceed with 3 to 4 coats of sprayed def buffed in between coats. All that remains now is to line up that slot with my indicator dot, some tight bond glue in there, and this project is finally done.